With only 9 games remaining in the regular season, how did the Edmonton Oilers stack up against the rest of the Western Conference on today's edition of Locked On Oilers?
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Sararis. I want to thank everyone that's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So on today's show, we are going to do one of my favorite things. We're going to do a bit of a deep dive. We're going to talk about the Western Conference at large. So we're going to start today's show with one of my pet projects, one of my working theories. It's something in the vein of what you would hear a Bill Simmons talk about back when Bill Simmons was still an interesting person as far as ideas and thoughts. We're going to start. It's called the gym class theory. So we'll start there. We're going to pivot to what the underlying numbers say about the Oilers in comparison to the rest of the Western Conference. And then in the final segment, I'm going to make my best case argument for why the regular season results might not have as much bearing on the Oilers' playoff hopes as maybe you might think. So starting off, if you are a person who was particularly uncomfortable in gym class, this segment might not be for you, but in gym class, whenever you would play a game, break up into teams, you would have captains, the captains would pick people, and those teams would be put together on a snake draft basis. You pick one person, it goes down the line, no matter how many teams there are. And when you think about the Western Conference at large, I don't think it's controversial to say the West is better than the Eastern Conference. I think that is a very commonly held opinion. I think you look at the quality of teams in the West versus the East, and I can make an argument for at least 5 teams in the West being capable of winning the entire conference, whereas you look at the East, and based on recent history, based on track records, I strongly believe it's really only the Panthers or Lightning that are going to come out of the East. Sure, Carolina might be able to. If you believe in the Maple Leafs, God bless you. But until I see them in a Stanley Cup final, I'm not really going to believe them capable of doing that. And you compare that to the West, where we're talking about the 3 monsters in the Central of Winnipeg, Dallas, Colorado, Vegas, recent Stanley Cup winner in there as well. The Oilers, who, even with the recent poor run of form over the last month or so, are still firmly in that camp of contenders. And that brings us to what I am calling gym class theory. When I am picking playoff series, or I am trying to make a decision on who I prefer in a playoff series, my starting point is always gym class theory, where if I lined up 2 teams on the end line and we were going to pick back and forth 2 teams, how many picks would you take from one team before you would take from the other? So, for example, if we were to use gym class theory between the Kings and the Oilers for the first round, which is what it would be right now for the 4th straight season. The Kings have a 2 standings points advantage over the Oilers right now. They have 91. They have 8. The Oilers have 89. They have both played 73 games so far. So there is some back and forth there. They do play before the end of the regular season as well. That game will have those increased stakes for home ice, because home ice is so important when you're playing a team like the Kings that has such a good record on home ice, that has really taken advantage of the benefits of home ice, mostly being hard matching, getting last change, and really being able to play matchups. But you line up the Oilers and you line up the Kings on the end line, and we're going to pick teams to play hockey. McDavid, Draisaitl, Bouchard all get picked before you take anyone on the Kings. And there might be someone watching this who wants to make an argument for Anze Kopitar or Drew Doughty or Quentin Byfield or Adrian Kempe or a healthy Kevin Fiala. And I don't think you're taking any of those guys before you're taking the first 3 players on the Oilers. And as the foundation for this argument, I think you feel reasonably good about that. Now, star power is not necessarily the biggest indicator of eventual playoff success. I think you could very reasonably have made the argument that if you were to have done this exercise before last year's Stanley Cup final, you probably would take McDavid 1. Last year, if we were going to do this before the Cup final, the second choice would have come down to Barkov or Draisaitl. Whatever you prefer, I think you can make an argument for both guys, and I wouldn't really judge you. Coming into this regular season, I had Barkov ranked, I think, 2 spots ahead of Draisaitl coming off of last year's playoffs, but Leon is currently the Hart Trophy favorite, and I'm going to keep saying that even if the sports books don't agree with me. And as we sit here and we start extrapolating this exercise outward, so let's say the Oilers beat the Kings for the 4th straight time. Then you are looking at the Golden Knights against the Minnesota Wild as the other first-round series the Oilers could play into. As of right now, you would assume the Golden Knights win that series. You're going to take McDavid. You're going to take Draisaitl. Then I think you probably take Jack Eichel. Then I think you probably take Evan Bouchard. Then Mark Stone. Then Shea Theodore. Then Zach Hyman, I think. But ultimately, this theory is useful for the foundation of an argument. The further you go, and we're going to keep building, getting deeper in this conversation as our segments roll along, we're going to pivot to the underlying numbers and what they say about the Oilers in relation to these other teams in a minute. But for the first round, that's enough to get past the quality of opponent you're going to see in the first round of an NHL playoffs. You can get by with just more star power. The longer you go, the more stars other teams are going to have. That's where depth really does start to play a factor. The longer you go into the playoffs, the better the quality of opponent, the deeper their lineup is going to be. More often than not, the better quality of star players they're going to have. And this is a really difficult proposition for the Oilers because this year, more so than last, they're a lot more reliant on their big boys to do a majority of the lifting. We've talked about this a lot over the last month. The everydayers know. Go look at the box scores for the season. Go look at the team's leaders and statistics. Once you get past their first 5, there is a massive statistical drop-off when it comes to counting stat production. And as we're going to talk about in depth in our next segment, the Oilers have massively underperformed their metrics pretty much all season at 5-on-5. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means as far as efficiency, as far as style of play, whether that's indicative of bad luck or if that's really a bit more reflective of who the Oilers are. And I don't think there's a perfect answer, but I do think the Oilers on a baseline, they have enough star power to hang with anybody. I think you would take their best players over pretty much everybody's except for Colorado's, because then it's an argument of what you prefer more. So if we were to do this exercise, gym class theory, with all of the other 7 teams that are currently in a playoff spot, you're taking Connor first overall, I think, no matter what. Yes, I think you're taking Connor over Nathan MacKinnon. If you prefer Nathan MacKinnon or Cale Makar or Jack Eichel to Leon Draisaitl, I probably wouldn't agree with you based on just this season, but if we were to do that over, a 2 or 3 year window, I think you'd be more likely to convince me of your argument. But I think all of these teams, you're going Connor, Leon, and then it's a real conversation is who's the third pick in a snake draft? Who would you get third after those two? Because if you could get Cale Makar, that's great. If you get Nathan MacKinnon, that's great. But Connor and Leon are 2 of the 5 best players in the world right now, and that is such an incredible advantage. And then you throw in the capacity of Evan Bouchard and Matthias Ekholm together when they're at their ceiling, and very quickly you can talk me into the superstar-heavy lineup that got them so far last year. Go look at the minutes allocation in the playoffs last year and how much the Oilers rode their big guns and how little their bottom-of-the-lineup guys played. And very quickly, you can talk yourself into the Oilers running a similar recipe this year. But that will do it for our opening segment. We're going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And when we come back, we're going to dive into the underlying numbers, what it means that the Oilers are underperforming their metrics to the degree there are, and a whole lot more on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. So be sure to stick around. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where'd all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in as your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on takeout. Now, I budget smarter, I meal prep, and I save more. Monarch Money's all-in-one convenience means you don't have to juggle multiple apps. You can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan out long-term financial goals. Managing money with a partner is even smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set common goals, and stay on the same page without stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are sizing up the Western Conference. And I really feel confident that the Stanley Cup champion this year is going to come from the West. I think Vegas, Colorado, Winnipeg, I will put in there, and the Oilers are all Cup caliber teams. I don't see a world where the Kings, I don't think either of the wild card teams, I don't see that, but I do see a world for the Big Five in the West. And again, like I said in the East, I don't believe in the Carolina Hurricanes. Until I see them in a Stanley Cup final, I'm going to be skeptical. Same thing with the Maple Leafs. The Devils are too injured. Neither wild card team, like as fun as the Senators are in theory, that's not a team that's winning anything. And then all of the teams in that second wild card are pretty stinky. The Red Wings, the Rangers, the Islanders, the Blue Jackets, and none of those teams are particularly serious. Oh, and Montreal, of course. I don't want to leave out the Canadiens. But as we sit here right now, I think a lot of Oiler fans have a tepid nervousness. I think a lot of us are concerned that the team has underperformed its talent this year, that for all of the talent they have in their lineup, the team should probably be better than it is, both in terms of the results and in terms of their record. And yes, those two things are tied together, but on a night-to-night basis, the play is a little too inconsistent to feel particularly confident. And when you go and look at the underlying numbers in comparison to these teams in the West, you get a really unique picture, because the Oilers are first in scoring chances. They're first in shots on goal. They're dead last in 5-on-5 goals for. They're first in expected goal share. They're first in high danger share. They're last in save percentage. They're second to last in shooting percentage at 5-on-5. So if you add all of that up, a ton of scoring chances, a ton of shots on goal, a ton of expected goals, a ton of high danger chances, and you have the lowest goal share of any of these teams, that is a massive, massive red flag on a few different levels. Number one, it tells me your offense is not particularly efficient. Because if it was efficient, you wouldn't need that many chances to create goals. Because ultimately, this is a measure of efficiency. The more possession you have, the more puck control you have. That doesn't necessarily mean you are going to score more. It does mean you should score more. And when you are underperforming your metrics to this degree, where you're 56% expected goals, 49% actual goals, that tells me that you're probably a little too much of a volume-based offense, meaning you're not that selective. You're just funneling pucks on net. You're trying to crash. You're trying to rebound. You're trying to create offense kind of in the aggregate, if you will. And by virtue of being a little more patient, being a little more choosy, you can create more dangerous offense. And that really becomes the differentiation point in a playoff series, is who can create more dangerous offense more consistently, because both teams are going to have players capable of generating their own offense. That's really the nature, and what separates a great player from a good player is a great player doesn't need help. A great player is capable of being a one-man wrecking crew, of creating offense, of putting themselves in a position where they're going to be able to facilitate for not only themselves, they're going to be able to raise their line mates, make them better as well. And for the Oilers, I know it's very easy to point to the goaltending as being a cause for concern as far as the goal share, and I do think that's a reasonable critique. I do think it's worth pointing out that the Oilers also concede a lot defensively. They're not the most defensively stout team. They let me refine that point. I do want to be fair. They give up the fourth most high danger chances against, the fourth least, so middle of the pack. And what really jumps out to me is 7th out of 8th in expected goals against, and they're dead last in goal share. Right? So what that tells me is that the Oilers defensively give back quite a bit, in spite of the fact that they control possession a lot more. And that would lead you to believe they're conceding a bit of quality against. And everydayers have heard me say this more than once. That's the nature and the danger of being an explosive offense, is you're going to get that puck close to the net mouth, and you're going to have 3 forwards in a very confined space, and you're going to have your 2 defenders out on an island. They're going to be holding the blue line in hopes that you can maintain possession, because if not, that other team is going to have a numbers advantage going the other way, and that's really the trade-off. And we know Chris Knobloch really wants his forwards to be defensively responsible, to back check aggressively, and really kind of augment defense, because defense is a team effort. It's not just defensemen. The effort level of your forwards in the neutral zone and the defensive zone are a really strong reflection of your team and its identity, because defense ultimately comes down to effort. How bad do you want it? How badly are you willing to get to where you need to be to make a play on the puck? And I don't think the Oilers are a bad defensive team. I do think the way they play offense can at times make their defense a little vulnerable. I think the amount of times Evan Bouchard's been out on an island as the one guy at the blue line, and he's lost a puck battle and the other team's gone the other way and scored on him. I think about the game against Vegas way back earlier in the season. I think about that game against Buffalo where Tage Thompson just bullied him and went around him. And it's not the easiest thing in the world, but the Oilers have the capacity to play better. It's simply a matter of being a little more choosy, and that's hard to do. I think a lot of teams are delicately walking that balance of trying to manage quality versus quantity, because you need a certain baseline level of quantity amount of offense to eventually focus on quality. And you don't want to lose baseline quantity for quality, because that's going to lead you to having less of a chance. And it's a trade-off. All of these conversations are, what do we think we can get away with, and what's going to make us what's going to give us the best chance to be successful. But that will do it for this second segment of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, I'm going to lay it out real simple why I think the Oilers, in spite of their underlying numbers, in spite of their goaltending, very much are in the thick of this. Be right back. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you feeling fuller for longer. Personally, big fan of the no-shell variety. Perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days, whether I'm here at my desk working on the show, on a road trip, or I just need a quick protein fix to hit my macros for the day. They're a great go-to. Or If you're old school and you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein that provide all 9 essential amino acids. Get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. And thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we make the case as to why the Oilers are thoroughly in the mix. And I do think it's reasonable to say the West was not as good last year as it is this year. I think the Avalanche had a bit of a down year. In the grand scheme of things, I think their goaltending was really concerning. I think the Jets, the way they went out in that first round, was really kind of eye-opening to their deficiencies. Vegas losing to Dallas eliminated a Stanley Cup contender in the first round. And the Oilers' path wasn't easy by any means, but it was more doable and more feasible than the one they're probably going to have to walk this year. And this format of division-based seeding has positives and has drawbacks. The positive, if you're the Oilers here, you're going to play the Kings again, and you have the capacity to beat the Kings. I think, frankly, on any given night, anyone can beat anyone. That's not really saying a whole lot. This is professional sports. That's why we play the games. But I think the Oilers, when they were at their best this year in late December, January, they were playing really high-level hockey where the breakdowns and the mistakes were at a minimum. The team's power play was humming. The team's penalty kill was humming. They got just enough depth scoring that the Stars did not have to run themselves ragged. I think there is a conversation to be had about the Oilers' usage of their high-end players this year, especially when you consider where they're at in the standings and how hard they're having to work just to be here. You look at the average time on ice allocation, where McDavid's at 22 per game, Draisaitl's at 21.40, and then you have a big drop-off down to Nuge. He's at 19. And then, Zach Hyman is at 19 minutes. Nuge is at 19 minutes. And the further you go down the order, the bigger the drop-off. Once you get past Nuge, the forward with the next most ice time is Victor Arvidsson, who's at 14.40, and then Adam Henrique, who's at 14.25. And you compare that to Arvidsson's and Henrique's career averages, Arvidsson's getting 2 minutes less than he's at his career average. And Adam Henrique is getting almost 3 full minutes less than his career average this year. You compare it to Jeff Skinner, who's under 13 minutes for the year. Podkolzin, who is right at 13 minutes. Janmark, who's at 13.05. Connor Brown, who's at 13.39. This is a very aggressive minutes allocation skewed towards the top half of this lineup. And that has been largely born of necessity. In an ideal world, you don't want to have to burn Connor and Leon just to make the playoffs. I think the fact they were in such a cushy spot last year allowed them to distribute the minutes a little more evenly. I think they didn't need to rely on Connor and Leon together at 5-on-5 as much as they have this year because the team was just better last year. And I know I said this segment was kind of going to be looking in the direction of positives and why they can do this. And I think it's really straightforward. What they have done so far shows a team that can maintain possession, that can have the puck a whole lot. I don't think it's a crazy stretch to say a team that has the puck a lot can start to get a few more bounces. You think about it in terms of just raw shooting percentage and the averages of what they've been. This year, the team is shooting 10.1%. That's 0.5% than league average. You go look at last year's team that was at 10.5, which was 3.3% over league average. That 1% does not sound like a whole lot, but a 1% shooting variance over the course of an entire season, that actually does start to accumulate. 1 out of every 100 shots on goal doesn't sound like a lot, but when you think about the total amount of shots on goal the team has over the course of a season, the Oilers had 2,768 shots on goal last year, and 10.5 of those went in. Hypothetically, if you were to rework the math, and that was 292 goals for the entirety of last season, let's say the Oilers had the exact same amount of shots on goal, 2,768, and you wanted to find out what it would be if they had the 10.1 they're at this year. That would result in the Oilers being a significantly worse shooting team. And that really tells you the story of what this team has been so far. And I struggle to understand the massive disparity in shooting here. Some of it is Zach Hyman, of course. He had a career year last year, but that's not everything. Hyman for his career is, I think, a 13 or a 14% shooter, which is really good. He's 13.7 for his NHL career, and that's what he's shooting right now. Last year, he shot 18.6. Again, 5% does not sound like a lot, but when you aggregate that over the course of an entire season, and you talk about the volume of shots on goal that Zach Hyman had last year, and I know he's missed some games this year, but he's going to finish with probably 70 fewer shots on goal than he did last year, and he's going to shoot 5% worse. That's where you start to make up this disparity in the counting stats. And the beauty of the playoffs, and this is what I would say if I was Chris Knobloch, is that they're a fresh start, that everybody's stats reset, everybody's leash resets. They are an opportunity to prove yourself. When we are in the playoffs, we are running a meritocracy of the highest order. If you are hot, you are going to get rode. If you stay hot, you're going to keep getting more opportunities. And any coach who isn't willing to ride the hot hand till it fades is leaving meat on the bone, is leaving something on the table. And you can't do that as a coach in the postseason where you need every last advantage. Right now, if you ask me on April 1st what I think the Oilers are in the pecking order, I think Vegas is the best team in the Western Conference. I've been pretty adamant about that all season in spite of the Jets' regular season success. I think Vegas' proven track record in the postseason gives me a lot of confidence in them. I would say the Dallas Stars are number 2. I would say the Avalanche are 3. I would say the Jets are 4. And then I would say the Oilers are number 5. The Jets and the Stars are in very similar boats where I really like the talent both teams have, but I need to see them win these big series against teams that have more talent than them. And it's not easy, and there's no shame in losing to a team that's better than you. We talked about this yesterday in regards to associating winning with being of good moral character, and that if you lose, there's something wrong with you. Yes, you could say the team is missing something, that it needed more offense or defense or goaltending, and that's why they lost. But that doesn't mean they're bad. It doesn't mean they are unworthy. And I think that conversation is a bit theological for what sports are, but I do think it's interesting. But right now, the Oilers are definitely at the lower end of the contender spectrum, but they have every bit the capacity to jump right back in with one good hot week from Connor or from Leon or from Evan Bouchard. And banking on hope is not the best place to be, but the Oilers are capable of this. The Oilers can do this. That will do it, though, for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind before you get out of here, please hit the subscribe button, leave a 5-star review if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. Subscribe if you're watching over on YouTube. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On NHL, covering the biggest stories from across the league with the local expertise of Locked On. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.